Okay, last video for this lesson is about investing in the cities, and where can civic renewal come from. Um, so, urban voters are solidly Democratic, and rural voters are tilting increasingly Republican. And this slide should have gone with the last video, but so we're catching up. But we are seeing that urban counties are much more Democratic. Suburban counties are pretty much even, and rural counties there's a big divide between liberals and conservatives, with conservatives dominating. And so that's just a visual illustration on what has happened politically in the cities. And so I apologize, that should have been in the last video, but it wasn't. Okay, private investment in American cities. Um, there are some real advantages for a business to locate in a city. And indeed, the vast majority of Fortune 500 companies are headquartered in cities. One reason is that cities have infrastructure, they have utilities, transportation, and a really big one is airports and easy access to airports. And this is a reason why you might want to be located in a city. You also have access to other businesses. Now, this can be to have people to sell to, but it can also mean that if you have kind of a synergy in the workforce, there are trained people that you can hire. There is the kind of capital networks, financing networks developed because either the banks understand businesses like yours, or you've got venture capitalists in the area. And so these kinds of things mean that businesses tend to cluster. And I think in California we have two of the big clusters. We have Hollywood and we have the Silicon Valley. And so when you think about the Hollywood, and one of the advantages to filming a movie and locating a studio in Hollywood is that you already have a workforce of costume designers and makeup artists and grips and all of those kind of positions. And so you don't have to develop that from scratch like you would if you set up filming in Alabama and tried to recruit locally. Similarly, one of the strengths of Silicon Valley is that that is where the computers programmers are. And so if you set up a business in the Silicon Valley, a software business in the Silicon Valley, you kind of have a ready-made workforce. These cities are also attractive places for people who are coming out of college, who are looking at getting into the industries. They're attractive places for people to move to. So if you think about the Amazon headquarters 2 effort, and they put out a general bid to cities and said, let us know what you can give us. A big thing in their a request for proposal was that we want entertainment options, we want mass transit options, and a little city in Podunk, Iowa, is not going to be able to provide those things. But Amazon knew that in order to attract the kind of talent they wanted, they were going to need access to these things. And then another issue is access to research and development, especially universities. And universities tend to be located in larger areas, and they tend to attract businesses to them. And so those are some of the advantages of locating your business in a city. Some of the disadvantages are that cities have higher crime rates than suburban or rural areas. The overall population tends to be less educated. The cost of land tends to be more expensive because it's denser. And the political environment, businesses tend to be fairly conservative, and the political environment in cities tends to be fairly liberal. And so that is a disadvantage to setting up a business in a city, is that you may face more regulations and more taxes. Um, when we look at whether or not we should be investing public money or private money in cities, um, private money, there's a lot more private money. The government only has as much as it can extract from the public in taxes, whereas the base for that is much bigger, and the base for that is private businesses. um, Another kind of thing is that businesses make investments for practical reasons. And there is an argument to be made that the invisible hand may better direct resources than the public sector could. When businesses make investments in cities, however, they go to the wider, richer areas. And so there is a 15-8 ratio for majority white to majority minority areas within cities. And so, whereas the public investment is looking at kind of doing the most good for the most people, the business is kind of, what can get me a better return on investment, which may not be or is not kind of an equal investment in all of the citizens. And then there is kind of the argument that that public investment should sort of balance out the market forces that are pushing things to richer, wider areas. An argument for this is that the government is a safety net, and that the government should try and provide those services, provide that infrastructure where business chooses not to invest, just as a kind of a safety net situation. On the other hand, there are people who argue that the government should facilitate economic growth and not determine where the capital flows. When we look at what kinds of public investments in the city happen, a big one is transit. Providing mass transit, providing roads, that is a huge investment in cities. Improving schools is a huge investment in cities. Um, Putting in universities and hospitals, which provide increased levels of service, also provide a lot of really good paying jobs. That's an investment in cities. Investing in high quality and safe parks and open spaces, and in creating major redevelopment areas in terms of providing tax incentives and other structural kinds of facilitations to make an area more attractive to business. And so I guess we can end up saying that there's a role for both public sector and private sector in revitalizing our cities. There is kind of a caveat on all of this, is that when we have when we have investment either from the public sector or the private sector, it can result in gentrification, and this can push out low income and minority populations, disrupting their lives, their informal social structures and safety nets and things like that, which means that maybe instead, when we fix the cities, we may be doing it at the cost of the residents, and maybe even shifting the problems that we tend to have concentrated in the cities into the suburban communities around there. So that's a real thing to think about. In sum, the crisis in the cities happened when the cities hollowed out, and as a result, poorer cities became less attractive to businesses, and the poorer residents then pushed back in the form of violent protests, um, which led to a spiraling decline. After 15 or so years of this happening, the federal government took a look at it and really tried to make some reverses in the situation that we're now seeing the fruition of. I mean, cities are now seen as vibrant places. Young people are moving to the cities. Cities are seen as the most attractive places to live, especially for people without children. Older people who sent their kids to college and into the workforce are moving back into cities and things like that. Um, this is causing in many ways, this was the ultimate goal, but it has meant that we are dispersing residents who have established patterns, established communities into suburban areas where the social safety nets may not be as apparent, where the social safety nets are more stretched because you don't have a concentration of people who need those services and things like that. So it is a major issue. It's one of those issues that we're never really going to solve. We're just always going to have to balance. And in every balance, there's a trade-off. And so when we look at the crisis of the cities, which has been a kind of historical thing, we look at a series of trade-offs that we're now seeing today in terms of the cities have come back, but there are trade-offs for underrepresented and poor populations in that as well. And that wraps it up for the crisis in the cities.